can't pay a pastor off, and that's not going to work. But I'll tell you what you can do. And this is what you and I need to do. And it's what all of these have done that I've mentioned, and countless hundreds of thousands and millions of others have done with checkered past, no matter what they were. They had a come to Jesus meeting. You've got to have a come to Jesus meeting in your life. You've got to be there. Remember David? The one who was committed adultery with Bathsheba? David, the one who was the accessory to murder? Remember David? Here's David in Psalm 51 while he's struggling and dealing with this stuff in his life. While he's at a crossroad moment, here's what he says. He says, "For I know my transgressions and my sin is" what? "Always before me." Let me tell you something. You know that sin is a roadblock in your life. If your sin of your past is something that's always before you. Or whenever it's brought up, or the thought of this that you thought was out of your mind, when that thought returns and someone spurs that thought, and you feel guilt and shame and regret and all those other things because it's not been appropriately dealt with. David says, "My sin is always before me. Against you, God, and you only have I sinned." He understood where he had to answer for his sinfulness. He may have damaged a number of other people, and that had to be dealt with. But he knew that ultimately he had sinned against God. He had violated God. And then he says, "Cleanse me. God, you cleanse me and I'll be clean. You wash me and I'll be whiter than snow. You created me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit." Why did they say it? Because he tried everything else to deal with this. Everything else. And he knew that he had to humble himself before his God and admit his sinfulness, and in that moment God would do something different in his life. And that's what he needed. It's a come to Jesus kind of meeting. And then remember Peter? Peter had denied Jesus how many times? 3 times. And when after the crucifixion and actually after the resurrection, Peter's discouraged. He's depressed. Remember, there was a time when his eyes met Jesus in that road to the cross. And the guilt and the shame, the regrets were all there. The feeling of failure in his own life. The feeling that God could never use me again. How could I ever be used to him again? I'm part of the inner circle. I was a part of his leadership team. How in the world would he ever use me again? And Peter says, "He called me to be a fisher of men. I'm going to go back to doing what I know how to do best." And he went back to fishing for fish. And he was such a great leader and had such charisma in his leadership that they all went with him. They all followed. And they're out there fishing. They fish all night, unsuccessful. They look over on shore. There's a guy calling to them, "Throw your net out the other side." "Well, we fished all night. We've got just throw your net out on the other side." And they do, and they have this catch that's so incredible. And at that very moment, it clicks for who? None other than Peter. And Peter realizes it's Jesus. And Peter doesn't wait to row the boat to shore and get the fish to shore. Peter can't wait. He doesn't care what the rest are doing. He's headed for Jesus. He jumps into that water and he starts swimming. And in the scriptures, you expect this incredible meeting. And all of a sudden, it goes silent. Why? Because somewhere from the time of Peter's excitement, realizing who it was on the shore, somewhere in the midst of his swimming to shore, he remembered what he did. And he pulls up short. I don't know if he crawled down the shoreline and snuck in another place. I don't know. But I do know this, that Jesus knew exactly where Peter was. And Jesus finds Peter. Everybody's eating there at the campfire, and he looks and he finds Peter. And Jesus goes to Peter. And he stands in front of Peter. And he says to this guy that's broken and doesn't feel he could ever be used again, he looks into his eyes and he says, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter says, "Yes, Lord. You know I love you." And then he says, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord. Yes." "Peter, do you love me?" 3 times He had denied his Lord, and 3 times Jesus gave him the opportunity to confess him and profess him. How many times do you think God would forgive you? Once? Twice? 3 times? Jesus said 70 times 7, which means as often as I need it, even though I don't deserve it. He'll forgive us. You got to have it come to Jesus.